Hi, I'm Jenny Burney, and Christy Spears-Newmeister is with me today, and we want to talk about the use of models to develop critical and creative thinking within the Indiana High Ability Language Arts units.
There are many different types of models. The three that we're going to focus on today, we have reasoning models like Paul's and Bloom's, or process models, the research model, scientific, problem-based learning, and creative problem solving. And finally, we have organizing models like vocabulary, literature, and writing webs. The goal is to get students to internalize these models so that they can automatically start to apply them in new situations throughout their learning career and their lives.
Yeah, the models are not the point, but the models provide the roadway to the destination, which is, for us, of course, in high ability education, critical and creative thinking. If the models are used consistently from grade to grade, then the models can provide a well-worn pathway that the students can use to help them to organize their tasks and to arrive at a positive, production. It's not that there are not other ways to arrive at our various goals, but because there can be other ways, but the student knows a good way of thinking and a good way to arrive at a good product by the use of models. And the models also facilitate the articulation from grade to grade, which again facilitates student understanding in the long run.
Okay, something to keep in mind when we talk about models and teaching thinking skills in general, these skills and these models, they don't transfer when they're taught in isolation. Okay? They need to really be embedded within the curriculum so that students have an example and are able to apply right away the models that you're learning. And they also need to be well scaffolded. We can't just tell students, think critically or go do research. We need to teach them on a step-by-step basis on how to do these tasks with guidance from us. Okay, we thought we would just go through a few of these models that are well represented in the Indiana High Ability Language Arts units, starting with the creative problem solving model. Okay, there are 6 steps to this model, and each step has a divergent and a convergent component. The hope is by following this model extensively, students will be confident that they've explored all aspects of a problem before they've decided on a solution and developed an action plan. So right now we'll walk through each of the steps to see how the model works and give you an example from one of the language arts units. Okay, in the first step, we have the mess finding stage. In this stage, students are trying to figure out what it is that they want to work on solving. In the divergent part of the stage, they may ask themselves questions like, what bothers me? What do I want to make better? What stresses me out? What do I want to change? And as they work through the answers to that, they would select one of the quote-unquote messes then in the convergent part of this stage to move throughout the rest of the process. In the problem finding stage, here's where students try to actually define the problem. Oftentimes we know something is bugging us, but because it's stressful that we have something that's bugging us, we just jump into a solution and we don't take a step back and figure out what is the actual root of the problem. This step forces you to do just that. When you use the IWWMW beginning, that stands for in what ways might we. So you try to define the problem in as many ways as you can. For example, if my mess that I'm trying to solve is to become healthier, I might ask myself, in what ways might I eat better? In what ways might I reduce my stress? In what ways might I exercise more? Okay, these are all different problem definitions leading to very different solutions. And as I work through this process, the convergent step here would be to try to figure out which of these is the real root of my particular problem. Okay, then once we've selected a particular problem statement, we move on to the data finding component of the model. And this is when you collect information that you need to know before you solve the problem. Okay, so all of the facts and information that is relevant to your particular problem definition. In my example about trying to be healthier, if the problem definition that I chose was eating better, I might need to collect data on the number of calories I should be eating in a day, the amount of each specific nutrient I should consume, the role of different foods on inducing different moods, etc. Okay, the convergent component of this step then might not happen immediately. You need to keep going back to the data finding as you move through the problem-solving process to select the important or relevant bits of information to keep moving you forward. Okay, so once you have figured out your mess, defined your problem, gathered some initial data, you then move to the idea finding stage, in which you try to brainstorm all of the possible solutions you can think of for that problem. And when you're in the idea finding stage, you should really apply all the rules that you would typically think of for brainstorming. For example, trying to come up with wild and crazy ideas that might free you up to think about some solutions you otherwise would have dismissed. Trying to keep all criticism at bay and just let the ideas flow. Trying to come up with as many ideas as possible, and trying to piggyback on your ideas to constantly improve upon ones that you've already considered. Okay, once students have a list of all these ideas, the convergent piece to this stage is to then pare that list down to only the most 4 or 5 promising ideas to move forward. Okay, in the next step, the solution finding step, students decide on criteria in which they're going to evaluate each idea. So they might consider criteria such as, will it work? Is it convenient? Will people like it? Is it time consuming? Is it expensive? And they kind of create a matrix with each of those 4 or 5 most promising ideas down one axis, and then each of the criteria listed across the top, and then they weight each of the ideas against each of those different criteria. Coming up with the idea that has the most points then is the one that is the most promising. They take that idea then and make an action plan for implementation from start to finish. What do they need to make sure they can actually carry out that idea?
We'd like to walk you through how this actually works in a high ability language arts unit. And the one we selected for this to use as a demonstration really came from the Unit 3, which is grade 2. And what they initially did was that the students listened to the story, Thank You, Mr. Fokker, within class. It was read aloud. And the issue that was identified here is, why do some children have a weaker connection to school? So in this, Mr. Fokker is someone who is helping somebody who's having some trouble learn to read. But the issue that the students come up with then is that, why do some children have a weaker connection to school? Small groups then had chart paper and brainstormed all the possible reasons that somebody might not like coming to school. And then the groups would share their reasons, and then they narrowed these reasons down to the top 3. The groups narrowed things finally down to one reason and restated their problem and their issue. For example, learning disabilities might cause a weaker connection to school. The groups brainstormed possible solutions for their problems, they shared, and then they developed action plans related to what they could do when someone would have a weaker connection to school, what might be some of the remedies. So actually they taught this problem-solving process to second graders, and Amy Marchand and I happened to be in class the day that they were doing this and observed it, and we could see that this was very effective even with students in grade 2.
Okay, another model that we wanted to go over with you today that is well represented in the units is the problem-based learning approach. In problem-based learning, what you do is present an ill-structured scenario or problem to the student, and you put the student or a group of students in the role of a professional charged with finding the solution to the problem. During the process, the student or the team of students must determine what is known and required in order to investigate the situation and come to a reasonable solution. They're meant to simulate the type of problem solving that would be encountered in a real-life, authentic situation. Okay, so really, when you break that down, students need to figure out what do they already know, what do they need to know, and how are they going to go about finding it out. When you construct a problem-based learning approach for high ability students, we need to make sure that the content is sophisticated or advanced enough for these gifted learners, looking at complexity and depth in the concepts that you're covering. The problems work best when they encourage students to consider interdisciplinary connections, and when the decision requires them to think about things from an ethical perspective, that there's conflicting ethical points of view to consider. And as always, when you're drafting your problem statement, make sure there's a good match between the curriculum and your instructional goals with the problem that you're having the students work on.
An example we pulled from Unit 9, which was designed for 8th grade high ability students. And in this Unit 9, they looked extensively at inheritance problems and King Lear as their literature base. So the instructional purpose of the problem-based learning scenario that was in that unit was to be able to identify problems, to ask significant questions, to find out related facts, generate ideas, consider alternatives, and find solutions. And that's, of course, what we're talking about. We want students to be able to use, and the creative problem-solving model allows students then to achieve this type of a purpose. Again, students worked in small groups initially using chart paper or whiteboards and their need-to-know board and a handout, which I'll show you, on developing an issue. Here was their problem-based learning scenario. So supposedly, they had an uncharted piece of land and they were trying to form a new government. Obviously, this has been a situation that's been present at various points throughout history. So, a lot of people want to be the one in charge. Okay, well, this is not this is a real world type of problem. So, does the leader rule until death, and then his heirs take over, or should the leader be voted for and the leader can only lead for a certain period of time, or can they serve as long as they have support of the other people? So, as you can see, this is a type of thing that is fraught with issue and judgment and point of view. And so it's a good opportunity for there to be some persuasive writing, to consider all the points of view, to have to do some research, and so forth. I'd also like to talk about the problem-based learning example from Unit 7. The students are in small groups. They have a need-to-know board. They're given some research articles and websites. Sometimes you might have the students do their own research, but in this case that wasn't the point of the lesson. The point of the lesson really was this problem-based learning instead. So they were given some research background and corporate requirements checklist, which I'll show you a handout that they were given. But again, the instructional purpose is similar to that we saw in the 8th grade unit previously in their problem-based learning scenario. Their scenario was that their small group was a nationally renowned advertising team that was charged with creating a public service announcement that will be featured on a tween website. Your presentation to the corporate sponsors is scheduled at a particular time, so in addition to the information in your spoken presentation, the sponsors would like a written report of the research used to create the ad. This is the information that was given to the group of students. This was their corporate ad requirement checklist that they had. So this, as you can imagine, with a group of gifted learners presented lots of questions, but that's kind of really the point, that you aren't always given all of the information that you need. You have to abide by some guidelines. You have to figure some things out for yourself, and this is where the problem-based learning scenario is very effective with this this age group of students. Now, the other model that is contained within the high ability language arts units, or one of the other models, is another process model on research. We certainly want all students to be able to do research, but it's not enough to just tell students, go do some research. You need a step-by-step process for them to follow so that they end up having some productive research. So again, these steps are not necessarily set into stone, but you have a procedure for them to follow which will yield a better result. And when the process is the same from grade level to grade level, then eventually this becomes the well-worn path to the destination that they are able to do for themselves. So you can see that they identify their problem or issue at the beginning, and they do a preliminary search to see if they can even find enough information about that, or do they want to change their issue. They are looking for how they can find information. They're going to want to have a variety of sources. You can just move through this in a systematic way that provides them with some scaffolding to turning out a very good result to their research questions. Now, this is one of the assignments that was in Unit 9, designed for 8th grade on censorship. And they were to choose one area of censorship that interested them and research it thoroughly, to create a multimedia presentation explaining this area of censorship, forming their own opinion statement regarding the issue, and supporting it with evidence from reliable sources. You can see in that task that there are a lot of components to what they're actually doing that are things that you would want them to gain from a well-designed language arts unit. So that is an example there. And this is a handout that is given to the students about the research model, so that they can actually use it to construct their notes and make sure that they're following a systematic process. So the units contain a variety of opportunities for students to do research, for students to develop problem-solving skills, for them to experience some problem-based learning. And these are, again, some of the models that are consistently offered in the units, so that by the time a student might have experienced units over a number of grade levels, they would have developed some skills to attack problems that they will have in the future. This concludes our look at how the models are used in the Indiana High Ability Language Arts units to facilitate the development of critical and creative thinking.